California has an opportunity to put a minimum wage increase on the ballot this November, but Democrats are standing in the way so far. Joining us now is Joe Sanberg, who's a leading backer of the push to raise the wage in California. Joe, welcome to Rising.
Thanks for having me.
And so can you lay out the situation? I know that you guys have been pushing to get this on the ballot, and by the time you get petitions done and everything else, it would be 2024 when when it could actually be decided by voters. But there is a way to get it on the November ballot. How difficult is that, and what would need to happen for California voters to get a chance to raise their minimum wage?
Well, first, let's set the stage. The Living Wage Act is officially and constitutionally qualified for the 2024 ballot. So that's the farthest out parameter. If we move it, though, to 2022, it's going to mean 2 years of additional wage increases for 5 million people. So what's at stake, whether it's in 2024 or 2022, is literally tens of billions of dollars a year for 2 years for 5 million California workers. So the stakes couldn't be higher. But I want to just establish we are qualified for the 2024 ballot. And here's how we get on the 22 ballot. The governor, Gavin Newsom, can call a special election. The law is clear that he has the executive authority to call a special election for a ballot proposition that has already been constitutionally qualified for a future election. So it's a crucial predicate to know that because we're qualified for 2024, that triggers the governor's executive authority, as defined by California's constitution, to call a special election for voters to vote on that already qualified proposition sooner. So the governor has the authority to call a special election in November and do what's called consolidate that special election into the general election already occurring in November. So in sum, the governor absolutely has the constitutional authority to put the Living Wage Act and the ability for voters to vote on an $18 minimum wage on the November 22 ballot. And I want to close that by reinforcing that this is the will of the voters. And here's how we know it's the will of California voters. First, over 1 million Californians, over 1 million registered voters in California signed a petition to put this on the 22 ballot. Second of all, elected county registrars were qualifying signatures with the intention to qualify it for the 22 ballot. And finally, 73% of Californians say they want to vote yes on it in 2022. So from those three angles, it's unambiguous. The will of Californians is that this be on the 22 ballot.
It's interesting because one of the parts of the labor market has been private businesses as they try to incentivize workers to come, do all of these jobs, have hiked wages on their own, and some of that has gone up just naturally with the market. And I'm curious as to how that has politically interacted with the attempt to get this on the ballot. Is that also has that been a convenient maybe talking point for the Newsom group as they think about, or the Newsom sort of team as they think about passing something like this in this environment?
Well, it's important to note that as inflation has accelerated, the popularity of raising California's minimum wage has grown by approximately 10 percentage points over the last 9 months, and that with Tolchin Research, and Ben Tolchin's one of the best, most credible pollsters in the country, he's been surveying Californians now for about 9 months on this matter, and the data is clear. As inflation worsens, public demand for a raise in the minimum wage has increased, and I think it's really worth unpacking that where we stand now with 73% of Californians supporting the Living Wage Act to raise the minimum wage to $18, this isn't a partisan issue anymore. Yes, raising the minimum wage is a progressive issue as a matter of values, but when you have 73% of people, even in California, we're a blue state, but we're not 73% blue. Nearly half of Republicans support this.
And so just to be clear, would Gavin Newsom need the legislature to consolidate this onto the November ballot, or is this his constitutional authority on his own?
No, he does not need the legislature. The California Constitution is unambiguous and clear. The governor of California has the executive authority to call a special election for a ballot proposition that has already been constitutionally qualified. So to be super clear and at risk of being redundant, because I think it's so important we all understand this, because we're qualified already for 2024, the governor's constitutional authority to call a special election is triggered. In some alternate reality, suppose that someone came up with a new ballot proposition and it weren't constitutionally qualified for a future election, the governor couldn't just say, hey, I woke up this morning and I want to put a ballot proposition on through executive authority. It's only and specifically because we have already constitutionally qualified it for a future election that the governor has the constitutional authority to call a special election so that voters can vote on it sooner.
Now, actually, Senators Cotton and Romney, this was about a year ago, here in Washington, D.C., at the federal level, introduced a bill that would raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. And Joe, you mentioned Republicans. You mentioned that it's not completely a partisan issue. And I'm curious as to whether any California Republicans are an interesting group. They're very different than Republican, basically, teams in other states or Republican parties in other states. Has there been any interest from California Republicans in this legislation? I know they talk a lot to small business leaders. Small business leaders are still hurting from the pandemic and might not be entirely favorable to something like this at that time. But what's your experience been as you talk about these things?
Well, first, let's debunk this idea that small businesses oppose a higher minimum wage. It's actually not true. It may be that certain lobbyist groups that are funded by dark money that say they represent small businesses claim that small businesses oppose it. But in real life, small businesses support a higher minimum wage in California, and here's why. Number one, businesses do better when their customers have more money to buy their goods and services. And small businesses especially do better when customers have more money to buy goods and services locally. So when you put more money in the pockets of workers, small businesses prosper because their customers have more money to buy their products and services. Second of all, one of the dimensions of the workforce that is under-narrated is the competition for workers and the recruitment of workers. And in a tight labor market, businesses have to spend a lot of money to recruit workers. When you raise the minimum wage, you actually reduce the expenses that businesses have to incur to go and recruit workers. So actually, what those lobbyist groups funded by dark hidden money won't tell you is that minimum wage hikes actually reduce the costs to small businesses because it reduces the amount they have to invest to recruit workers by making the prevailing wage higher, which is fundamentally what draws workers in.
And is that because more workers come into the job market when they hear about these higher wages, or they want to work more hours because of the higher wages? Is that why that is?
Both. And I'm glad you mentioned working more hours, because raising the minimum wage is more than just raising the wage that minimum wage workers earn during an 8-hour day. It also means that for workers who choose to work overtime, they're earning even more, because depending on overtime laws in certain counties, you're earning double time, time and a half. It also raises the wages of workers who are earning above minimum wage because it raises the whole pay scale.
And let's talk about the politics real quickly. We talked about this last week on the show, and since then, Representative Ro Khanna, California congressman, came out and said Newsom ought to put this on the ballot. Has there been other pressure on him? Is this a question that he's going to face either from Democrats in California or from the media there, or is he going to be able to just kind of skate and not have to answer this? Because I feel like if he has to make a decision, the only decision that he can make that's politically sensible is to put it on the ballot. But if he can avoid making any decision at all, then one day becomes the next, and he says, "Oh, it's too late."
Ryan, this isn't going away. The conversation about the minimum wage in California has permanently changed. It's going to be $18. It's a question of when, not if. And I want to call out other leaders who've just been extraordinary profiles and courage here. As your audience may know, our ballot committee, the Living Wage Act, filed a lawsuit to compel the state to put this on the 22 ballot. And I was joined as a co-plaintiff in that lawsuit by a member of Congress, Nanette Barragan. And Congresswoman Barragan represents the 4th poorest district in California. And imagine the courage it took for her to be a co-plaintiff on a lawsuit against the state of California. In addition, Ada Briseño, who's the chair of the Orange County Democratic Party and co-president of Unite Here Local 11, one of the biggest labor unions in the state, was also a co-plaintiff with me. And so it's an incredibly powerful statement when we have a citizen activist in me, a member of Congress in Nanette Barragan, and one of the most respected labor leaders and a chair of one of the largest county Democratic parties in the state in Ada Briseño, together as a trio as co-plaintiffs. So this isn't going away. It's just a question of when the minimum wage will be raised to $18. It's not if.
Joe Sanberg, thank you so much for your perspective this morning.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more Rising after this.